this is the plug. I put this weekend on, so you're going to listen to me for a few minutes. Hopefully you'll find it interesting as well. Right place, right time. Rallies and routes to the Caribbean and around the world. We basically want to inspire you to go and sail with us. We want to inspire you to go sailing. We'd love you to come and sail with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ark and some of the rallies we do very quickly to set the scene for what these guys out there have done and what you might hopefully do sometime in the future. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Ark, it's 200 plus yachts heading across the Atlantic every November. That's a view of the start from Las Palmas. Lots of boats going in the same direction at the same time. It's a very big start line and it takes half an hour plus to cross it. It's not a racing start unless you're a German. Apologies if there are any Germans here. Es tut mir leid, aber sie macht die Konkurrenz gerne. Some of them can be a little competitive, and occasionally some people will sit on the start line holding station with their engine on to be the first to cross. That's not really what it's about. It's about the fun of the fair. It's about waving at your friends, enjoying the moment, and yeah, you've got 3,000 miles ahead of you. 30 seconds isn't going to make no difference at all. So, for those of you planning the Ark, my advice is hang back, enjoy the moment, wave at your friends, take lots of photographs. You'll be surprised how quickly the moment passes, and it is the launch pad for your trip, so enjoy it. A few stats. The first one was in 1986. It's been going strong ever since. Over 24,000 people have taken part in the Ark, and almost 6,000 boats in that time frame. And each year we get over 30 nationalities taking part, so it's a very international event. And for a lot of people, that's part of the fun. It's meeting the Swede or the Norwegian on the dock next to you and discovering the joys of pickled herring or aquavit or whatever it might be. The biggest one, everyone always asks me, what's the biggest, how many boats? The biggest single start was in '99 for the Millennium. Since then, we've actually split it into two starts. We have a route that goes to the Cape Verde Islands and then across to the Caribbean, and a route that goes direct. That's basically split it up a little bit. So now we typically have about 200 in the direct route and about 60 to 70 on the Cape Verde's route. Why do we go when we do and where we do? That's a route map of the Atlantic. Apologies if you can't quite see. It is a little brighter than the weather forecast was expecting. It's all about trade winds. It's the wind blowing you across oceans at certain times of year. Crossing the Atlantic, the Atlantic trade winds kick in from late November and gradually strengthen through to about March. In the Caribbean, they're known as the Christmas winds, strong winds that bring Christmas to the islands. The Ark always goes at the end of the third week of November. It's the earliest that we can go to hopefully get a good trade wind and get you to the Caribbean in time for Christmas. The best trade winds happen after Christmas, but you've missed Caribbean in the Christmas Caribbean. So, two factors. One is getting you to the Caribbean in time, and the other is the end of the North Atlantic hurricane season. You'll hear people talking about the hurricane season. Hurricanes can happen in the North Atlantic any time of year. If you look at the pilot charts, they'll show you that factor. They're driven by the water temperature. As the ocean cools at the end of the summer, they tend to die off in frequency. Late in the season, it's still warm in the Caribbean, so if you do get a late season storm, it tends to be on the Caribbean side and goes north and bothers the Americans. The route we're taking is well away from that track. So we're going at the beginning of the off-season, which is the Caribbean winter, and that's also why people sail in the Caribbean in the winter, because that's the safest season from weather. It's also when it's cold and snowing at home. So that's really why the timing of the event takes place when it does. Two routes, as I mentioned. The direct route on the Rum line is 2,700 nautical miles. You will sail closer to 2,800, 2,900, especially if you have any kind of asymmetric downwind sail where you're going to be doing angles rather than a straight line. To St. Lucia. And have I got the other route on there? No, I haven't. You'll also see there's a route by Cape Verdes. That's the traditional, what they call south to the buttermelts route. Literally south out of the Canary Islands, you keep going. It's a lovely sail down to the Cape Verdes. Usually fairly lightish winds, but pleasant. You haven't really hit the trade wind belt at that point. The sea state hasn't built up, so it's a very nice, gentle introduction. You get to see some other islands. The Cape Verdean Islands are described as perhaps more African than the Canaries. It's another island to tick on your list. One word of advice for cruising is don't miss the chance of seeing somewhere. If you're only going past it once, don't necessarily listen to what other cruisers have said about, oh, the beer's expensive in that place. It's a bit more than seeing just a beer. It's experiencing somewhere new. So I'm very much an island bagger. I like to tick them off and say I've been there. Cape Verde is across. Once you're in the latitude of the Cape Verde Islands, you're in the trade wind belt. So you should then get these lovely northeasterly breeze coming over your right shoulder, blowing you comfortably across the Atlantic. Caribbean season I've already talked about. We'll talk a little bit more about cruising the islands later. And then the return route at the end of the Caribbean winter, when the sea is starting to warm up again. Not that it's cold in the winter, but the ocean heats up with the summer. That generates potential for tropical revolving storms. So they say that the end of the Caribbean sailing season is traditionally the end of the beginning of May. So May, June, boats are leaving the Caribbean to come back, either going to North America or heading up back to Europe. In that gap in the middle, as you can see there, that's high pressure. So in order to get home again, you can't sail directly that way. You have to go up to get the winds coming back across. On the way back, you're picking up weather systems, Atlantic weather patterns coming off the continental USA and coming across to Europe that way. So you're riding weather fronts on the way back, whereas on the way out, you're riding trade winds. That's why people say that the route home is harder. Two reasons. One, you have to understand a bit more about where the weather's coming from. You don't want to go too far north. You get into the very strong winds, so finding your optimum route for pleasant amount of winds. But really psychologically, every day is getting colder. When you're going to the Caribbean, every day gets warmer and you're taking clothes off. When you're coming home again, it's the reverse, I'm afraid. So it feels worse because you're starting to put oilskins on at night, having got used to sailing in t-shirts and shorts. I think it's a more rewarding sail, and you do get to visit the Azores, which are a little bit of paradise in the Atlantic. So again, my top tip for enjoying your Atlantic cruising is do make time to see the Azores. You can come and sail with us on the way back as well, and we do have an Azores cruise. How long is the arc crossing? Well, partly it might depend on the boat you've got. A typical crossing, I've put the word average cruising yacht there. I don't really like the word average, typical's probably better. 17 to 21 days. It does depend on how big your boat is, it depends on how many crew you've got on board, it depends on your downwind sail plan, and it depends on seasonal winds. You will have read about El Nino and that sort of thing. The winds do vary year on year. Some years we have blisteringly good trade winds. I sailed the Ark last November, December, and we literally flew across. It was cork out of a bottle job. 2 years before, there was hardly any wind and boats were refuelling in the Cape Verdes on the way across. So it does vary from year to year. Ooh, what else did I say? The Ark record, unless you happen to be buying a Volvo 70, you won't be doing it in 8 days. So don't plan on an 8-day passage. But it's quite fun to see these fast boats doing it. And the slowest, 33 days. Again, that's not very typical. It was a particularly slow boat, and they had some problems, mechanical problems and various other things. I would say a slow passage is 24 days, 25 days. So that's the kind of range you're looking at, but most people are doing it in about 3 weeks. What's a typical Ark boat? Based on statistics, it's a monohull, and it's about 45 feet. It's about 9 years old, and about 15% of the boats that sail the Ark are catamarans. That number is growing year on year. Apologies that we don't have any catamarans to show you this weekend. That's because catamaran owners don't like to pay mooring fees in the Solent. So there aren't any around here for us to show you. So, but certainly something to think about. And very typically, boats will have 4 to 5 people on for the Atlantic. It's not that that's the optimum number necessarily, it's just all your mates will want to come with you because it's such fun. Typically we find on the way back boats tend to have fewer crew on, and that's probably the trip when you want more crew, I would suggest. And lots of families, about 10% of the boats have families on board. It's great fun. If you are thinking of sailing with kids, definitely do it. Don't listen to the anxiety and the fears from your parents or grandparents about the whole thing. Go and do it. If you particularly want to talk about sailing with children, come and have a word with me or Claire or Russell on Madfish, who sailed with his family. So strongly recommend it. It's a great thing to do. We do more than the Arc, closer to home. Arc Channel Islands happening this year in association with RWA Active Marina. It's great as first channel crossing. It's an arc across to the Channel Islands really, or if you want to do a shakedown perhaps on a newly refitted boat, you get all the fun of the fair and you get the organisation of the trip, the weather, the position reporting, that kind of thing. So it's a nice little starter rally, I would call that. To Russia with Love. We do a trip to the Baltic every 2 years, so the next one will be in 2017. It's quite a long way to Russia, you'd be surprised. It's a 6-week rally which takes us to St. Petersburg and back through the Finnish and Swedish archipelagos. So a great way of exploring some of the Baltic and getting into Russia. And heading south, those of you aiming towards the Mediterranean, Arc Portugal is effectively a mini arc across the Bay of Biscay, and then day cruising along the Portuguese coast. So it's a chance to go to some places you perhaps wouldn't have gone to otherwise. And Portugal is wonderful. They are very, very friendly and welcoming. So it's certainly a place I like going to. It's ideal as a passage-making event if you're going into the Mediterranean, and if you're looking to base a boat down in the sun. Lagos and the Algarve coast of Portugal is a very good place to keep a boat. Happy to talk to anyone in detail about that afterwards if they like. Here's the aspirational part, sailing around the world. We've got a number of people in our open boat fleet and in the audience who have done their world circumnavigations. If you want to do it with us, the Ark will take you around the world from St. Lucia every January via the warm water route through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific to Australia, and then we go via the Indian Ocean to South Africa and back via Brazil. And there's an option to go to New Zealand as well if you want. I'm not going to say too much about this other than reiterate it's about going at the right time of year for the winds. So you'll see in the Atlantic there we've got December and January trade winds coming in to the Caribbean. January, March is trade winds kicking off in the Pacific to push you out across, and then April, June in Central Pacific, and then June to September over towards the South Seas, Fiji and Australia. So really pushing you across the Pacific. Same weather pattern operates in the Atlantic, except it reverses on the southern hemisphere. And then January, February coming back up from South Africa to Brazil. You can do it in one circuit, which is 2 years from Europe to Europe, or you can do half the route to Australia, spend more time in the Pacific, perhaps go down to New Zealand and do the second half again later, or not do the second half. So it's designed to be flexible to kind of work with your cruising plans. And then some little pictures to whet your imagination. That's boats going into the Panama Canal. The big advantage of doing it with us is you'll go through in a nest of boats. If you go through independently, they'll put you in the back of a lock with a big ship and squeeze you in when there's a gap. With a big group, they can plan the transit for us and we go through in rafts like that, which is a bit more pleasant. Galapagos, top tip for Galapagos is keep sea lions off the boat. I don't know if you can see in that picture, there's these shapes here, 2 sea lions. The water's quite cold there and they like to get out of the water and warm up, so you'll find if you've got an open transom, you'll find a sea lion on it. Pacific cruising, what can I say other than it's idyllic? If you haven't done it, it's a truly amazing place to go. That's a picture of the Tuamotus atolls in French Polynesia. It's like everything you've ever read in books, trust me, it's lovely. Indian Ocean, that's a bit of a Robinson Crusoe place. It's Deception Island in Cocos Keeling, which is your last kind of what I would call palm tree and coral sand place before you get onto the African side. And then we have a great Zulu welcome in Africa. We make landfall on the Indian Ocean side in KwaZulu-Natal, and then we coast hop around into Cape Town for Christmas, and then a chance to go across the South Atlantic then onto Brazil when we're in Brazil in time for Carnival. So this weekend we want to give you some tips and inspiration about preparing your boat. We will talk about equipment and dull stuff, but just remember, why are we talking about boats? Why are we talking about life rafts? Why are we talking about equipment? It's because you want to be there. Think about that picture, remember that. When you get a down day and you have a falling out and a row, and you will, think about that picture. That's why we're doing it. We're not doing it because we like talking about outboard motors. We're doing it because we want to be on our boat in that anchorage. So hold on to your dream. The hard part is the preparation and actually going. Hopefully we can help you sail onto your dream anchorage. So it's great fun, and hold on to that dream, please do. Happy sailing from World Cruising Club. I'm going to hand you over to Roger now from Hamble School of Yachting, who's going to give you his experience and thoughts on what we've called training for cruising. This is a sort of wake-up session for what you need to be a blue water sailor. It's a little bit different once you get out there. You can't just ring Sea Start, you can't just call the rig at the marina, hand in the boat keys and go home. It's about being a bit more independent, a bit more engaged in your boat, and Roger's going to give you some pointers on his view of key skills you should be aiming at if you're going to be a true blue water cruiser. So, Roger, thank you.